Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Massal, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargeant. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, picky eating is one large frustration amongst a lot of parents, especially during the meal times. But if you're going through this, it's safe to say that you are not alone. It is definitely very common amongst young children. And today we're going to be looking at ways to manage picky eaters and find healthy alternatives to some foods. Joining me today is registered dietitian, nutritionist, and author, Dr. Marcia Herrin. Thank you so much for joining me today, Marcia.
You're welcome.
Now, as always, we love to get started with our guest with a little quickfire game that sort of introduces you in a very different way. So are you ready to get started with this?
Yes.
Now, do you have a favorite book?
I'm really enjoying, I read professional books. It's called Burn, and it's a study of how exercise doesn't lead to calorie loss. It's very exciting. The research was done in Africa.
Okay, wow. No, that sounds very interesting, especially when it comes to dealing with different cultures as well. Sort of their own eating habits is really interesting. Now, do you have a movie that you enjoyed recently?
Enjoy might not be the right word, but it's an amazing movie based on a book that I read a while ago, Killers of the Flower Moon. I don't know if you know this book and story.
Yes, no, I am seeing it, I think, this weekend. I'm very excited to see it because I haven't read the book, but I've seen a lot of the reviews on the book, and then I really want to go see the adaptation, how they sort of take it, because I know adaptations are hit and miss with a lot of books.
Yeah. I think this is a good one. And the female star, a Native woman, is from my home state of Montana.
Oh, wow. No, that's really cool.
Yeah, very exciting. And she's up for an Academy Award if you all Australians follow that.
Yes, no, I think we're very, very into American pop culture and following along with that, probably more than our own, it's safe to say. Now, are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
You know, I'm too busy for that. I'm writing two books at once. I'm too busy. I do podcasts, but I don't listen to very many.
Well, that's fair enough. It's a time waster. So you have to really sometimes find the time to really sit down and listen to it.
And I tend to want to do something else when at the same time. So I'd rather have some music on.
Yes, I can definitely, music at the right time is perfect. Now, when it comes to role models, do you have anyone that you find yourself looking up to in either your professional or your personal life?
I really admire my doctoral advisor from 40 years ago very much, who's now a 90-year-old woman, this Columbia University. She very much inspired me with a quote I heard her say when I was a master's student. She trusts cows more than chemists to explain why she likes butter over margarine.
Okay, so what does that quote, can you explain what that quote means to you and why that sort of really resonated?
Well, it's about basic natural foods.
Okay. No,
Not that I'm opposed. There are people that need to eat margarine because they're lactose intolerant, for example.
yes. No, that's a, when you put it like that, that's a very simplistic way of sort of looking at the natural world and keeping things natural and simple.
And you really hit on my whole philosophy of nutrition, of not making it complicated, more complicated than it is. The squirrels know how to eat, right? They haven't taken a single nutrition course. I have a doctorate in nutrition from a really fine university, but what I've learned is it's simple.
Well, great. I can't wait to see how you sort of take that into our interview today. I think it's going to be very interesting. Now, regarding courses, during your academic pursuits, is there a course that still really inspires you in the area that you're in?
No, because there was hardly any teaching on eating disorders when I was a student, even a doctoral student, very little. And that's been exciting for me because I come into the field and it's wide open. I need to write some treatment manuals and books on this. So it's a relatively new field and a very exciting one. Picky eating falls into the field of eating disorders. We can talk about how it's different and how it also is related.
Yes, no, that's perfect. And it's the first answer of no that I've gotten when it comes to that question. I think everyone has sort of like picked up these little things that have changed, but I love sort of seeing the different view that you have where it comes with everyone not really talking about the area that you're in and you finding a gap to fill, which is perfect. Now,
Mind the gap.
So thank you so much for playing that. And I hope that you're all warmed up for the questions that we're going to ask about today.
Let me add something I think you'll find interesting. You didn't ask me about my hobbies, what I find fun. Okay. It's walking, hiking with my Australian shepherds. Do you know who they are?
Yes. Yes, I'm very deeply aware what Australian shepherds are.
Okay. I'm totally obsessed with, you didn't ask, face group books. I'm only on the Australian Shepherd Facebook groups.
Oh, that's perfect. So do you have favorite areas that you love to hike and the favorite mountains that you go up all the time?
Well, I'm very lucky to live in the mountains of New Hampshire. So my favorite is to walk out my door and up the road to some 10,000 acres of conserved land.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's amazing. Just to be able to live that close. From living in the suburbs, sort of seeing the completely different, the manufactured walkways, it's very different when you go into other areas and just sort of see how nature has naturally just taken its course.
Oh, it's wonderful. That's my only hobby.
Now, thank you so much for playing that again. And I want to ask, I know that your field is in registered nutrition. So in terms of when it comes to parenting, what is your role in promoting healthy eating amongst children?
Well, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of backwards, you might say. My professional work is helping parents who are having trouble feeding their children, either because they're extreme picky eaters that haven't grown out of it, or they're a child with anorexia or another eating disorder.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think one of the big things that I sort of see from that as well when it comes to is the cost of living when it comes to healthy versus quick food and how the time and especially in this day and age where everyone's working at most 2 jobs to sort of keep up with maintaining a household, which is always amazing to sort of see how people get by that. So I wanted to know, how did you get into wanting to be a nutritionist?
Well, I became a hippie, if you know what that word means. It's
Yes.
An older word. And I became a vegetarian. I grew up on a cattle ranch, and I just did the opposite of what my parents, and I actually got very interested in nutrition by learning how vegetarians could meet their protein needs by combining basically legumes or beans and grains. And that just really fascinated me. But it was also a world in which I ran what we called a natural food store, which is a funny title of things, but it means something. And I was quite amazed at all the different ideas the customers had about food. And that because I was standing behind the counter, they thought I would know something. I was, frankly, a 19-year-old college dropout. I knew nothing. But it made me want to know the truth about nutrition and food and the science behind it, not just my truth in a kind of a global or spiritual way, but the science. I was really quite interested in science. So I went back to school, and before you knew it, I had a doctoral degree and a baby and a job.
Wow, no, that's an incredible story, sort of coming up and doing the complete opposite to how your parents sort of raised you, and sort of you taking a different approach to, like you said, keeping it simple. And I think it's incredible to see. So I did want to ask, to start off with, I know that with that, everyone has a very different definition as to what parenting and being a parent is. So what would your definition of parenting be?
It's a really great question. And you've already figured me out. I like things simple. It's raising the kids and sending them off to their own lives. I also believe in not giving advice unless a child asks for it. I've watched too many families in my office. The parents will start lecturing a child about nutrition in front of me. Is kind of ironic, but they do. And the kid is just bored, can't hear it. I can say the same things if I get the kid engaged and they're curious about something. So I'm really believe strongly in not giving advice unless asked.
I love that parenting technique, I have to say. I think
I do get quite excited when my children call me, now they're adults, and ask for my advice. But nevertheless, yeah.
No, it's funny like that, 'cause especially when you're going from a teenager to being an adult, you say you don't need your parents that often when you're a teenager, and then when you become an adult, you're calling them probably 2 or 3 times a day to sort of ask what should they do, or having a little problem that needs to be solved. And I think it's amazing when I love that technique of the openness between a parent and a child, sort of knowing that you're there for them if they need you, but you're also not going to have a huge input into their life.
Right. Unless they want my advice, I will give it, of course. I'm always happy to talk. Yeah, it's worked out well for me and my children.
Mm-hmm. So with that, what do you think expectant parents should be aware of, and what advice would you give them sort of going through that transition of being a parent?
Well, number one, don't worry about it. It's biological. People have been having kids since the beginning of time, of course. Don't worry about it. But you can learn from assessing your own experience of a child. What did your parents do well? What would you do differently? You have a chance to redo, to do it better.
That's perfect. No, I think we always forget the fact that it's something that we don't have to put too much pressure on ourselves for. And especially when it comes to raising kids, I have a few friends who have young kids and who are always stressing about the fact that they're not eating properly, or they're not eating enough, or they're not playing around or socializing enough. And they're having a lot of say in, and it's always really interesting sort of observing that, because I don't have kids myself, but I have a lot of my friends who have kids, and just sort of seeing from the outside just how much pressure my friends put on themselves is too much. I mean, I swear I think my friend is going to get gray hair before she hits 35 because of how much stress she puts on herself. Now, in terms when it comes to child, like parenting and being a parent, I know there's a lot of input when it comes to making sure your child eats correctly. And I wanted to know sort of the underlying psychology that contributes to why infants and toddlers sometimes develop picky eating habits.
Actually, most of them are, if you look at it from the first time they taste food, and we're starting to feed kids earlier. In the U.S., we just normal family food because this purity that we've not waiting till kids were 6 months and older to introduce them to foods that the family is eating has contributed to food allergies because kids weren't exposed to foods early enough. And many cultures, it's normal not for the kid to sit in a high chair with special foods, baby food, and fed with a spoon, but to sit on grandma's lap and just, she's probably putting some food on her fingers and much more natural. Now, I admit to not having quite that approach when I was raising my kids, but number one, it's new. So we expect them to be picky. Where we get concerned is when a child, as they approach 5, 6, and 7 years old, is not growing out of it and is becoming more picky. That's actually a disorder that can be diagnosable, and there's treatment for it. And it's genetic, like most things are. That's the other theme I would like to put out there. A child that has trouble with picky eating, it's not their fault. It's not the parents' fault. It's genetics. It's how they were born, you could say.
Okay, I was actually just going to ask that, as how much of it is biology and how much of it is something that they sort of just pick up. Because it's amazing sort of watching a child and sort of their reaction to things that some adults don't even like, say broccoli, for example. Just sort of seeing the different take. Because I was looking at this social experiment that was done on two twin toddlers, and sort of seeing the two ways that they react. One reacted to broccoli with excitement, absolutely loved it, and the other one reacted and absolutely found that disgusting and could not even, that just threw it off the plate. So it's amazing to sort of see, and I do wonder how much of it is biology and how much of it is something that they just see and just don't really like automatically.
Well, I would wonder in that experiment, were the twins identical? Identical twins are nearly clones of each other genetically. Mm-hmm. Nearly, not exactly. I would guess that those twins were fraternal twins and no more sharing genetics than any other sibling. And a lot of eating issues are genetic.
Okay.
The kid that threw the broccoli, there's the genetic tendency to not like things that taste new and different.
So when it comes to the nutrition value, and I think we always hear the nutritional value that sort of takes on when you hear different kinds of foods, how critical is proper nutrition during early childhood?
Yeah. Well, it's very critical, of course. It's critical I grew up on a ranch. It's critical for animals to grow well. It's critical for plants to grow well. It's critical for humans to grow well. But it's not that hard.
Okay.
And we were talking earlier about, oh my gosh, homemade food almost versus processed food you might buy in a grocery store. In lots of ways, as far as we know, there's not big differences. It just happens to be processed in a factory and not in your home. I think parents make it too hard on themselves, that you have to make everything homemade from scratch. No, of course not.
And how does the lack of proper nutrition sort of impact a child's development?
Well, it's very interesting. I just met with a family today. The child's height has stopped. As she's 13 years old, we would have expected her to get taller, but because she's restricting her food intake, she is, no one gets shorter, but you can see on these growth curves is how pediatricians measure how a child is growing with weight and height, that she was expected to get taller, but she did not. So
Okay.
height, you only get tall, most people know this, while you're a teenager, some people into their early 20s, but after that, the gate is shut. And that's also true for bone density. So not having good nutrition and particularly enough food really affects bone density and height. Brain development as well.
Now, how do food allergies and maybe dietary restrictions such as lactose intolerance sort of intersect with those picky eating behaviors?
Well, number one, it is very important to have allergies diagnosed, not just presumed. I'm glad you mentioned lactose intolerance, and you could have mentioned gluten as well. Those are the two popular food allergies out there. What's interesting is it's rare for them to affect a child. These are food intolerances that usually come on much later in young adulthood or even older adulthood. Mm-hmm. And they're actually fairly rare, especially gluten intolerances, though you'd never know that. And it's wonderful for my patients that really have a gluten intolerance. There's so many products now. It's great. You can go and walked into a local bakery, and my husband just wanted a nice little pastry, and everything he looked at was gluten-free, and he went up and said, "I like gluten. Do you have anything with gluten?" The answer was no. We had to go somewhere else. There's a market for it, and it's great for my patients that have to avoid gluten, but that's rare, and there are medical tests for food allergies. Mm-hmm. Children may be allergic. It's more common to be allergic to certain nuts. That's a fairly common childhood allergy that can be quite serious.
Okay. No, I never really heard of having those allergy tests done until my friend had to get her son to get an allergy test because there was some things that it wasn't affecting him to the point he couldn't breathe, but it was affecting him with the trouble of breathing.
Right.
So,
and that's a classic allergy reaction, is that it affects breathing.
Yes.
People expect, we've become such a culture where any little stomach twinge means I've eaten something wrong and I must have an allergy to it. Rarely do classic food allergies affect the tummy. It's you can't breathe, or you break out in hives, or you go into shock.
Yes. No, I greatly always thought that I was lactose intolerant, mainly because I didn't like the taste of whole milk. And then my friend started laughing at me. She's also a nutritionist. She started laughing at me at the fact that you just don't like it. There's a difference between being intolerant to it and not liking it. And I think the way that society is sort of put in, like you said just before, that everyone sort of thinks that they're intolerant to it because they don't like it or because it doesn't sit well with them. It could be so many other factors that sort of creep in as to why it doesn't work with you, or why you can't have full cream milk, or you can't have certain types of milk. And it's really interesting to see how society has sort of put that expectation on us and put that phrase on us to say that that's how we are. We're lactose intolerant because we can't handle the taste of full cream milk.
Right. And, the concern is, that's not talked about very much. Besides dairy products, there are not good sources of calcium for humans. Calcium is really important for bone density, of course, but also it coordinates heart function. It's a very important nutrient. And one has to or should rely on calcium supplements, which there are some safety concerns being raised now that needs to be further pursued about, are calcium supplements a good idea? So only if you have actual lactose intolerance would you want to stay away from dairy products. And people with lactose intolerance hard cheeses have very little to no lactose. And most people with lactose intolerance can eat hard cheeses. I'll give you a little tip for improving the taste of milk, though.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a nutritionist, I know how wonderful milk is nutritionally. And like you, I was someone that really didn't like it that well.
Okay.
So I'm sitting, this was quite a while ago. Somehow I got bumped up into first class on an airplane. And I was sitting next to this really wealthy looking older man who asked for a glass of milk. And just the way, I'm a nutritionist, just the way he asked for it, one, that was rare, that he wasn't asking for a martini or something, but he asked for milk. I could just sense that he was prescribed this milk to drink. And he also asked for a glass of ice, which threw me off a little bit. He poured the milk into the ice and then waited a few minutes and drank it. Oh, very interesting. I went home and tried it. It's a game changer. I never have milk now without on ice. I even put it in my cereal, little ice cubes. When it's really cold, it does something nice to the taste for me and maybe the consistency of it. And there's nothing your story was, it's a full fat milk. There's nothing wrong with the reduced fat milks that you might like better.
Yeah, I think maybe because the ice cubes sort of diluted it a bit more as well. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And very cold probably minimizes in some ways the actual taste of the milk. And I apologize to the cow for that, but I do like it with ice cubes.
That I'm going to have to try that now, see maybe, because especially when it comes to, I think we sort of get that understanding that, okay, because there are other milk supplements. So there's like soy milk, almond milk, oat milk now. And especially when it comes to children, I think a lot of parents raising kids who don't really have full cream milk in the house. Like I grew up not really having full cream milk in the house, mainly because my mom was lactose intolerant, so we just sort of followed what my mom was. So then with a lot of parents, how important is it to have sort of those real full cream milks and other sort of things that your children aren't allergic to? They just don't really have them in the household.
Well, it's hard to argue that it's not important from a nutrition point of view. How is the child going to get their calcium? Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, and it's really changed, I think this was true in Australia too, every child, all the adults too, there was always a glass of milk at every meal. It was the beverage. And 3 glasses of milk take care of our calcium needs beautifully. You've got it made. So people have stopped doing that for all sorts of reasons. The so-called, they really should be called soy juice or almond juice. The Dairy Farmers of America actually had a lawsuit saying it really should be illegal to call these milk. They lost, sadly. Nutritionally, they're not equivalent at all. They're nutritionally, the best choice would be soy milk because at least it has decent protein. The others are quite low in protein. And they add a calcium supplement to try to equal the calcium in milk. Mm-hmm. No one's figured out how to keep the calcium in solution in these juice drinks. I'll call them that. It would take, have you ever been in a hardware store with a paint shaker?
Yes.
Okay, it's like this, 30 minutes on a paint shaker to get the calcium in the soy milk to stay in solution long enough for you to drink it. So you're not ending up with a steady dose of calcium by using these milks, and that's the problem.
Okay. So when it comes to those milk supplements, such as those 3 that I've just mentioned, so they're more as sort of like a social thing rather than an actual have any benefit to you.
Ask that question one more time.
So when it comes to those, so almond milk, soy milk, those kinds of milks, when they have them in like coffee shops, for example, or if they have them when you're with children, I've seen a lot of parents lately sort of have, instead of the the baby chinos or anything like that, or anything with milk in it, they try to find things with almond milk or soy milk.
Yes, where did they get the idea that there was something wrong with milk? Advertising of these other products.
Okay.
And it's appealing to decide we don't like something that older generations liked. It feels so modern, doesn't it? I was at a friend's house for overnight, and they only had these milks, and I tried it on cereal. I could, even with ice cubes, I couldn't handle the almond milk. I'd never tasted it before. I'm kind of, until then, I hadn't ever tasted any of these milks because the idea of them creeps me out. Milk from a bean or a nut just is creepy to me. Again, my ranch background maybe. I was not impressed with the taste, but it feels modern and it feels healthy. For people who are lactose intolerant, there are lactose-treated milks, cow's milk that have the enzyme. You know what lactose intolerance is? The person doesn't either make enough or doesn't produce at all the enzyme we need to break down the particular carbohydrate in milk called lactose. There's also pills that you can take that have the enzyme in it at the same time. That's a very nice way of doing it.
Okay.
Called Lactate in the U.S.
Okay. No, I actually didn't know that there was the actual meaning of lactose intolerance. So that's
right.
That's
what it means.
Something new I learned.
Yeah, good.
Now, Marcia, I wanted to know, when it comes to snacking and snack time and all these different things that sort of come up when kids come home from school, they go ahead and get snacks from the cupboard. How do you feel about managing picky eaters throughout snack time, especially for kids who just like snacks rather than a full meal?
Well, I think you know something about picky eaters. They tend to like snack food. They like low-end food, frankly. That sounds judgmental, I know. A screening question in the U.S., and you hope, because it's high in protein, do you like McDonald's chicken fingers or whatever they're called? They may like mac and cheese. These are foods that, and it's interesting, it has to be genetic. How could all picky eaters agree that these are, in almost every case, are their favorite foods? They like white bread, not whole grain bread. They like foods that aren't very popular anymore. But what's important is that their nutritional needs be met, and the most important nutritional need for any of us is getting enough calories. You can eat the perfect diet, but if it's deficit in calories, you're going to have many, many health problems. So part of the art for taking care of kids that are picky eaters is making sure that their pickiness doesn't decrease their calorie intake, which could affect how they grow, like we were saying earlier, height, bone density, brain development, muscle development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So kids absolutely biologically need an after-school snack. I think the challenge is for modern families is kids are often alone at that time because both parents are needing to work. So the kids aren't going to come home and make themselves a lovely sandwich and a glass of milk or some peanut butter and slice up an apple. They probably aren't allowed to use knives. I would be worried about my kids doing that. So the snack food that is, really designed for ease is easy for these kids. I suggest to parents that you have a plan for your kids. Why don't you have them a snack ready? If it needs to be refrigerated, it's in the refrigerator. Maybe have it all wrapped with a little bow on it with Sally's name on it, maybe, or it's kind of like a mini little sack lunch if it's cold or food that can be room temperature. Mm-hmm. Kids need boundaries. They're hungry. They need to eat something. That parents often just, whatever happens, I'm not there. I don't care. I don't want to know.
Yeah, no, I saw this video a little while ago of a mom who sort of has a different idea as to sort of stop snacking after certain times. She has this lock on the pantry cupboard, and after a certain time, it is locked. So after about 5 o'clock, just before dinner, it is locked, and in the morning, it's locked as well. So to stop the grazing, and I wonder how you sort of felt about that, because with my intake on when I was watching that is it stops a lot of the children's autonomy and sort of the belief that they can sort of have the chance to decide what they want to eat or make decisions for themselves as to when to do things and when to not. But I wanted to get your take on that, especially coming from your background.
Well, I've actually advised some parents to do that.
Okay.
Because we don't put kids in charge of much, do we?
No.
Yeah, not in charge of traffic or governments and it is a very tough world out there to make, even for adults, to make good food choices, because there's so many very tasty foods developed by, we think, PhDs in food chemistry for something we can't resist. And a child who's hungry, that's very difficult not to choose that food. Mm-hmm. And again, a child, I think, needs lots of help. Most parents really could get in trouble with school if they let their kid just dress any way they wanted to go to school. There are some limits, or when a child needs to go to bed or stop using their looking at their phone. Yes, poor kids. They are just kind of corralled by their parents about guiding them into reasonable habits, because we don't believe that they can make choices. And I think that's actually a good thing.
Okay.
Another way of handling it is parents don't. My daughter sometimes gives me a hard time that I've discovered that I like goldfish. Oh my. She says, and she's in her 30s now, "You never bought those for us, Mom." But we can make it easier for children from not filling our houses with a lot of food that we think that they might eat too much of or eat at. You don't want your kid to ruin their supper, to use an old-fashioned
No, that's
guideline.
Very true. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, like you said, we don't put them in charge of much. There's not a lot that they have control. How do you think that idea of sort of setting that time for them to not snack, how does that sort of help with them in the long run, sort of making, when it comes to their own decision making?
Well, I was quite directive with my children. They ended up going off to college and doing just fine, figuring all of that out for themselves. Mm-hmm. I think we can help kids by developing good habits by, now I want to also say we don't want to be over-controlling. Just to put this in context, I recommend all the families that I work with make sure that their child has something, I call it fun food, a dessert really with lunch and dinner. Again, another very old-fashioned way of eating, so that they have, not when they're hungry, but at the end of a meal, some lovely thing that we're eating just for the pure pleasure of it. And for some kids, that might be a salty snack.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sort of gives them that chance to decide whether they want something sweet or... So that's sort of the decision that they get to make and be aware of it.
But it's associated with a meal, so they're not hungry. The problem with any of us, if we're really hungry and there's only snack food around, that's what we'll eat. Or if you're a child, again, they're not likely to go and make themselves a sandwich. In my view, the perfect after-school snack would be half a peanut butter sandwich and a glass of cow's milk. That would be ideal for a child, and maybe a piece of fruit with that. And then they have dinner and they have their dessert.
Okay. So how do you help them or encourage children to sort of pick a healthier snack option? So if there's like all these snacks available, how do you sort of guide them, and what's the technique that you use?
Well, it's controlling the universe of the choices. If you want your child to have healthy snacks, serve them healthy snacks, make them available.
Mm-hmm.
There is an art to having your child also learn how to eat foods which are very tasty and we eat just for fun again. They learn to not be deprived of those foods. I'll tell you a story of, I remember when my daughter had a friend over when she was probably 6 years old. We had baked chocolate chip cookies.
Mm-hmm.
And we said, glass of milk and some chocolate chip cookies. It was a special snack. She was having a friend over for both of them. Then the little friend snuck back into the kitchen and grabbed 2 cookies and slipped them into her little jumper. And I thought for a moment of whether I should tell her parents about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually knew that her parents were both very, very strict dieters and had a house that didn't have any cookies in it at all. So this child, my child, didn't go back because she has cookies, something sweet every single day of her life that had no interest for her. So being too strict can lead your child to actually overeat these things when they have opportunity. It's all about moderation.
Yes, no, I completely agree. I think because we didn't have a lot of really sugary snacks when we were growing up. And I remember going to this, one of my friend's birthday parties. And I mean, birthday parties are always full of sugar. So the minute that I think that was the first time I had soda as well. Like I had Coke for the first time. And I was jumping up and down the walls because I've never experienced that. And I was about 8 or 9. And just having that as a 9-year-old having that as an adult, it affects me very quickly. But having that as a 9-year-old was completely out of the ballpark for how insane you could be. And that was the first time and probably the last time my mum had Coke. She allowed me to have Coke, or she was always trying to steer me away from just having just a sparkling water or something like that. That was a little bit easier for me to enjoy something soda-ish, but not really sugary the way that Coke is. And so but with birthday parties are insane for a lot of children always. So how would you sort of allow them, and do you have any sort of strategies for them to also allow the child to enjoy a lot of the sugary stuff that's there, but still making sure that they're not overdoing it?
Have it at meals.
Okay.
So you might have a lunch. Maybe you serve a small amount of Coke and sandwich and potato chips, and that is a really fun thing to do so your child isn't overly stimulated by it.
Perfect.
And people have been who are haven't tasted foods that taste really good, and it's really easy to go overboard. And these foods aren't going away. They're here, and one is going to have to negotiate this world. There's been movements in the U.S. I can't imagine it ever happened that we should ban these foods because nobody should eat them, or we should tax them so only rich people will be able to afford them. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense at all. I doubt that will ever happen. So we need to be able to work them in because humans like the taste of salt and sugar for some very biological reasons. Mm-hmm. Did you know there's almost no poisonous fruit or a plant product that tastes sweet in nature? So if something tasted sweet, it was safe for our ancestors to eat because they didn't have some federal agency deeming it safe. And salt is an absolutely essential nutrient, important for a lot of things, but particularly heart function. Mm-hmm. But salt is not well distributed in nature. You have to like the taste of salt. In more primitive times, you had to go to the salt lick to get your salt because otherwise, if we didn't like it, we wouldn't have trekked all the way there to get it.
No, that's very true. I think especially when it comes to things that you have to really work hard to discover. Like for example, like you're saying, a whole full cream milk, the way that that's sort of discovered, the way that we sort of use that now, it's not something that you just buy from the store. It's something that comes from something else that we had to really go ahead and discover ourselves, which is it's always really interesting how complicated we make things now and how complicated we make food now. We make the choices, like when it comes to organic versus normal kinds of fruit and the difference between that. And it's just everything is, like you said, I think a little bit earlier, when it comes to advertising, it's all about advertising. So when parents who are struggling to maintain their children's selective eating habits, what kind of support network or professional resources are sort of available for a lot of parents to sort of use to utilize when certain situations come up during the day?
That was probably, sadly, one of the hardest questions that you asked, because there are not many,
Mm-hmm.
particularly as far as support groups. And the place to go actually is the eating disorder world. There is, I did some research on this. I'm looking here to see, yes, what it's called. There is in Victoria, I know in Australia, there, that I had the name of, that's eating disorder, and I guess I don't. I'm really sorry about that. I have a website. It's eatingdisorders.org.au.
Okay.
And we haven't quite used this word that for parents who have children with picky eating that worries the parent, they probably should be looking for something called ARFID, ARFID,
Okay.
avoiding restrictive food intake disorder, which is picky eating that children don't grow out of, and it can be quite extreme. And there's a lot of research on that, and there are books for parents that have been developed to help them try to figure out what to do. But basically, I'd go see a registered dietitian like myself. I work with a lot of families with picky eaters that fall into this category of RFID. It's extreme picky eating, and my patients and their families are so relieved to hear that it's a thing, that it's not the parents haven't done something that caused this kid that often they won't eat vegetables, the textures, the smells, that the kid that threw the broccoli across the room, I go, oh, I wonder. These are kids, they're actually super tasters. They notice things in the broccoli that I wouldn't notice, and it isn't pleasant to them. And there's it's the newest eating disorder, actually, and there's so much research going on. I'm working right now on a chapter in a book on RFID and how professionals are to treat it. So I would look for resources around RFID, ARFID.
That's perfect. And I definitely know that there's so much more when it comes to picky eating and eating disorders like RFID that we haven't really touched on today. And I sort of do want to know, what's the last little takeaway for a lot of parents who are sort of struggling with their children going through picky eating, or maybe afraid that this is something they're not going to grow out of?
Well, it's the family meals.
Mm-hmm.
Whether your child is a picky eater or not, children should be coming to the table and eating with the family. One of the things that happens with picky eaters often, as we were saying, they tend to like snack food, not meal food. And in the most serious of cases, bring the snack food to the table and have the child who's not eating maybe the meat and potatoes that the rest of the family's eating, but they're eating with the family. And one interesting technique, it's actually good for these kids just to hear other family members saying, wow, that tastes really good. But here's the trick, but without anyone forcing that child to take a taste of it.
Okay. So they sort of get an idea of the fear of missing out, sort of feeling with it as well.
Maybe they would like to try it, but these kids often have been really pushed to try things. And I'll say just a few words about that. Really important, and actually that is a way of kids getting used to the taste of broccoli and other vegetables, for example, but they're not required to eat it. And you do it outside of a meal, and that they're rewarded for trying things, maybe with a little bit of money or some little toy. And a professional dietitian like myself can help parents kind of manage all of this. And it's really exciting, actually. But it's really important that the kids be treated gently and kindly and not pushed.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great takeaway, especially when it comes to just parents trying to maintain those meals as well. It's sort of a big bonding experience. It's sort of allowing all of them to feel like they all have some sort of say in what can go into the meal. And so I did.
Well, I'm not going that far.
Okay, I did want to clarify with that when it comes to meals. How much of a say, and I know that we've finished the questions, but this is sort of just something that I'm coming up with. How do you feel about sort of allowing the children to make decisions as to what can go into the tonight's dinner, or what sort of they have some opinions in that?
If you have more than one child, it would be chaos for whoever cooking the food, and parents would become short order cooks. My daughter went through a picky eating stage, and how we handled it, we had figured out in advance that if she didn't like what was being served for dinner, there was very simple food that she was allowed to eat. When she was younger, we get it for her. When she was older, it was, of all things, it's funny, cottage cheese, if you know what that is, and
yes, I love cottage
baby
cheese.
Carrots. Most people hate cottage cheese, but she liked it. And so she wasn't eating with the rest, and usually it was the protein and the vegetable that she wanted to eat. It was very simple. She would just get that one thing, so she wasn't making a mess of things. And then when she was 16, I remember she ate asparagus, and it just kind of broke out of it, I think in part because we didn't make a big deal about it, and she was well fed. And then she graduated from college and lived for 5 years in China, and who knows what she ate, and now is married to an Indian man, and she eats Indian food. It's really quite exciting.
No, that's an amazing growth as well. Just sort of allowing it to, like you said, really early in the show, let's just let nature take its course and just be there. And that's a great example of how your parenting style is as well, when it comes to just being there when they ask for help, but not really pushing and having a whole lot of input. And I think that's sort of attested to how they sort of took that.
Right. We don't put kids in charge of much.
Yeah, that's true. Now, when it comes to practice and habits, what is a practice that you do to try and maintain your health?
Well, I practice what I preach, so it's 3 meals a day.
Okay.
When I was younger, I needed an afternoon snack. It was a sad day when I realized I didn't need it anymore. And why am I not hungry for dinner? Oh, I guess it's time to give up my afternoon snack. And of course, whether you need snacks depends on the size of your meals. But the 3 meals is, if you look all across the world, humans that can afford it eat at least 3 times a day.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, I think that's definitely one thing that I personally struggle with as well when it comes to, breakfast and dinner are easy, but I think lunch happens always in the middle of the day. That sort of takes where I'm rushing everywhere, I'm doing so many things.
Convenient, isn't it? Because we don't stop. I'm really irritated. This one doctor's practice that I need to call them up, but they close their offices between 12 and 1 and don't take phone calls. I can't really complain because they're giving their staff lunch, but you're right. That's really hard. it is important to get it. Now, you have some options. No one says that it has to be noon or that time of day, though biologically it makes sense. You could have it at 4 o'clock. You could have the equivalent of your lunch before as a bedtime snack. I tell my patients, really what matters, you need to get what you need nutritionally before you go to bed, and then you're golden.
Okay, no, it's a good idea. I think what the difficulty is the fact that I have dinner by the time it's 5 or 6. That's when I sort of go ahead and have dinner.
Well, if you didn't eat lunch, yes, you would need to.
Yes. I it's something that I should practice, and yeah, I say that I will, but I probably won't, knowing me. So what do you find are the challenges of going through the practice of having 3 meals a day?
Well, the inconvenience of having to take care of ourselves in that way, like you were describing. I've had many, they don't want to be interrupted with their really focused on getting work done. I love my meals. Very much like to take a whole hour and really relax and read the newspaper when I'm eating breakfast, and make it a big deal. It's my recreation during the day, you might say.
Well, that's fair enough. I think especially with all the work that you're doing as well, you definitely need that time for yourself, and that definitely sounds like you're making it worthwhile. So how do you think that this practice has impacted you personally and also your perception in life?
Well, it's made it possible to maintain my health and my weight. And it's so simple and connects me to other people. Have you ever been invited out to lunch? You'd hate to say, well, I don't do lunch.
That's true.
Humans connect over food. And so we miss a lot if we're too busy to eat, or what's the modern alternative? You're drinking a protein drink and eating a protein bar and calling it good. Well, that's better. I have some patients that's where they need to start, and that's all right.
Mm-hmm. No, I can definitely see. I think it's such a great thing to sort of make a priority as well, sort of that time for yourself. Those 3 meals a day, sort of set time for yourself, set time for family, set time for sitting down and really enjoying something. And rather than just eating it in a hurry, you're eating it and enjoying it. So I can definitely see how good it is.
I'll check back.
Now, when it comes to, we're up to the last part of the show, which is our open mic. Now, this gives you a chance to talk about something that you are passionate about or something that you want to promote on our show. So in the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the floor and just share what's on your mind with us today.
Well, I really appreciate this invitation. When I came into the field of nutrition counseling for eating disorders, I realized very quickly that there was no information for professionals on it. And so I wrote the first edition of Nutrition Counseling in the Treatment of Eating Disorders in the 1990s. And then the second edition was in 2013, and I'm working on the third edition now. And my aim was to put down everything in this book that I do to share with other professionals. I've had some adults read the book and say, oh my gosh, I want to work with this person, and then search me out. This was a person that wasn't a professional. And then I had all these parents. We need a book to help us feed our kids. So in the midst of all this, I wrote The Parent's Guide to Eating Disorders, which also has embedded in it, is just my advice on how to feed a child in a way to prevent eating disorders. In other words, normal eating, as we were talking about here. And that book now has 2 editions, and I'm getting ready to do the third one, but I have to finish my other third edition first. So it's a great joy to do this. And I parents have found my book very helpful. Both books are available on Amazon, by the way.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'll definitely find those and put those down in the link below in order for every parent to sort of access it, and everyone, not just parents, but everyone who is sort of needing that little bit of motivation and has found a little bit of motivation talking with Marcia here today. Now, other than the link to Amazon, if listeners want to find out a little bit more about you, is there a place that they are able to go to?
I have a website, of course. I'm not that old-fashioned. MarciaHerrin.com.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll add those in the links down below. It's so easy for us to sort of find that out.
I know.
Now, thank you so much, Marcia, for joining me on the show today. It was amazing talking about this, and I definitely learned a whole lot, especially about lactose intolerance and how
Good.
And how it is not really just because your tummy hurts the reason that you're lactose intolerant. I think that's a really big takeaway from that. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you guys learned as much as I did. I will see you all in the next episode. You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargeant. Thanks for tuning in.